Every year, billions of dollars flow out of private philanthropic foundations to combat the most daunting global crises, from the impacts of climate change to the persistence of extreme poverty. This chart shows a glaring contradiction. While the total volume of philanthropic giving continues to reach new heights, the line tracking global wealth inequality follows the exact same upward trajectory. The resources are growing, yet the underlying systemic crises remain entrenched. Historically, the charity narrative has relied on a specific framing of the world. It positions the global north as a source of expertise and salvation, while characterizing marginalized communities as passive recipients of outside aid. The movement to decolonized philanthropy shifts the focus from the total amount of money being given to the specific hands that hold the steering wheel. It centers on the realization that social change is constrained as long as the donor, rather than the community, retains the authority to make every major decision. This creates a structural tension between two very different models of giving. On one side, a charity model built on donor control. On the other, a justice model that requires the actual redistribution of wealth. As long as the institutions holding the capital dictate the solutions, philanthropy functions as a way to treat the symptoms of inequality while leaving the power structures that created it untouched. In conventional grantmaking, the dynamic often mirrors this. Foundations hoard wealth in perpetual endowments, typically releasing only 5% of their assets annually. And even that tiny trickle comes with heavy conditions, forcing local organizations to navigate rigid reporting systems, language barriers, and metrics set by distant observers. This creates a dynamic of double dispossession. Wealth originally extracted from communities through exploitative labor or land theft is locked away in foundations, and then those same communities must navigate institutional hurdles to get small fractions of it back. These administrative barriers serve a specific purpose. They ensure the institution maintains its power and permanence, while the people doing the work remain dependent on a cycle of short-term, restricted grants. Shifting this dynamic requires more than just better intentions. It requires active frameworks like participatory grantmaking and trust-based philanthropy, which seek to dismantle the traditional culture of donor surveillance. These models follow the principle of nothing about us without us. Instead of relying on professional foundation staff, they place disabled activists and LGBTQ+ organizers and community leaders directly onto the boards that decide where the money goes. Trust-based practice also removes the bureaucratic burden by providing unrestricted, multi-year funding. This allows local leaders to respond to emergencies and pay for overhead without needing to ask a distant donor for permission to change their strategy. When foundations relinquish their role as ultimate arbiters of knowledge, the relationship with the community shifts away from surveillance and toward genuine solidarity. Reforming the grant application process is a necessary starting point, but if the foundation board still retains the power to set the budget and control the endowment, the structural inequality of the sector remains intact. Moving toward a decolonial approach eventually leads to the most difficult demand: reparatory justice and the direct surrender of accumulated wealth. Indigenous-led funds are a clear example of this. They bypass the large international NGOs that usually act as middlemen, instead moving resources directly under the authority of tribal nations to finance land return and strengthen community sovereignty. This also leads to the concept of spend-down foundations, institutions that recognize their wealth was often built on extraction and choose to actively dismantle their endowments until the foundation itself no longer exists. While charity is a voluntary act of the giver, reparations are based on a historical responsibility for harm. They transform the funding dynamic from a top-down gift into a mandatory reallocation of resources to the people whose labor and exclusion built the fortune. For true philanthropic justice to occur, elite institutions have to move beyond being the generous givers and instead focus on architecting their own obsolescence. There is a practical limit to what a private foundation can do. Decolonization, in its truest sense, requires the literal return of stolen land and the restoration of political sovereignty, outcomes that a grant agreement cannot achieve on its own. However, foundations can choose to use their hoarded resources to finance the movements fighting for those outcomes. They can fund community land trusts, build local infrastructure, and support the legal battles for self-determination. This creates what is known as durable power. It's the state achieved when Black feminist organizers, Global South movements, and Indigenous leaders hold the financial capacity to make long-term plans without external oversight. This level of unrestricted capital acts as a stabilizer. It allows grassroots organizations to survive sudden emergencies and political backlash, ensuring they aren't vulnerable to the changing priorities of billionaire donors. Ultimately, justice relies on the return of extracted resources. When marginalized communities hold the material capacity to fund their own solutions, they finally gain the power to architect their own futures.